The experience, a project of the fight and continuation for equality. My project surrounds the history of racial injustice of the United States and how it has manifested over the years. One woman who has really been at the center of all my research has been Michelle Alexander. She is a civil rights lawyer, professor, and human rights activist, among so many other things. She is the author of The New Jim Crow and was featured in the movie 13th, a movie that has offered me substantial amount of perspective and knowledge. A big theme in this movie is that everything has changed and yet nothing has. The United States is living in a constant state of denial, ignorantly believing, through the lens of white supremacy, that we have grown as a nation building up a strong and just social and racial hierarchy. Racial injustice has stemmed from the birth of slavery in the mid 1770s all the way to life as we know it in the 2020s. I think although it is important to keep up with how racism and injustice manifesting in the modern day, it is also crucial to understand the past. In her essay, Road Through Midnight, Jessica Ingram comments on a visit to Montgomery, Alabama, where she explored a former Court Square slave market. She says, "I'm from the South and I was raised with awareness of the devastating history of slavery, but this sight sparked something in me that caught fire. Of course, we all learn about slavery in school, although it is told as a white man's narrative. Going the extra mile like Ingram did to really understand its roots of this evil is what's going to make all the difference in building bridges of solidarity." In Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Daniel Tatum, it really helps to push the importance of education. Tatum says, "Educating ourselves and others is an essential step in the process of change. Few of us have been taught to think critically about issues of social injustice. We just have been taught not to notice or to accept it as our present situation as a given. You may not be able to understand what it feels like to be living in black skin, but remaining silent is not an option. Knowledge is power." We are living in a time where mass incarceration is the new Jim Crow, and the Black Lives Matter movement has made news headlines around the world. Through my research, it is clear that systematic racism is deeply rooted in the United States. Many Americans are convinced that we have moved on from our dark past with systematic racism and have embraced diversity as an inherent quality of the United States. I want to challenge this claim and argue that we have not moved on from our systematic racism, but promoted it to morph into a more complex and devastating crisis that remains unknown to much of the population. Black Lives Matter and the Civil Rights Movement, a comparative analysis of the two social movements in the United States, is an essay written by Dewey M. Clayton. His essay Connections Between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s and 60s, Clayton points out that although the Black Lives Matter movement really took off through the power of social media, both movements relied heavily on the energy and the enthusiasm of young people. This especially resonates with me being a young minority man in America. Using my voice to promote advocacy and equality is incredibly important as racial injustice is something that I can directly empathize with. An article by Douglas Murray called "Racism is a Magic Lantern" also highlights the power of social media in connection with how racism is viewed by the general public. Murray says, "Not is there no racism in American society, but that racism has been carefully magnified into a greater force than it is. After the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor killings, America was plastered on every single news outlet around the world. Although social media can help educate and inform, it can also be dramatized and be misleading. It is important to know how to use social media wisely, as it is one of the most powerful ways to use our voices. In the narrative of Frederick Douglass, he says, "It is easier to build strong children than it is to repair broken men. As young Americans, the future of our nation is in our hands. Creating an environment with the foundation of solidarity and knowledge will promote action and change."